Hey Swamp Folk, welcome back to another episode on the Swamp Dweller podcast. Today, I'm going to be sharing some creepy and allegedly true and disturbing horror stories that'll keep you up tonight. Now this is going to be a compilation of some older stories and some newer stories, so you may have heard some of these, and you may not have heard any of these at all. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit them at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp, and stories like yours help keep this channel going on a daily basis. I also stream multiple times a week over on Twitch, so if you're a fan of horror games and stuff like that, come join me over there. You can find a link in the description down below. Now, without further ado, let us jump into these creepy and allegedly true, disturbing horror stories. I used to play a lot of Insurgency Sandstorm with a fixed set of guys and girls. We used to organize using a Discord server. People came and went as time went by, but there were a couple of us that stayed in touch quite frequently outside of just organizing gaming sessions and became pretty good friends online. Insurgency, for those who have not played it, is one of those hyper-realistic military shooters that tends to get really intense. Occasionally, downright terrifying when it's at its best. I'm not saying we had this proper Band of Brothers vibe going. I know it's only a video game, but like I said, a handful of us ended up getting pretty good, and we became solid friends. We were bonding over an intense level of teamwork required to win the rounds, not to mention the sweaty-palmed, adrenaline-fueled firefights. One of these friends was named Colin. One day, Colin tells us that he wouldn't be playing Insurgency for a little while, because he had taken a job teaching English as a foreign language out in Indonesia. He had wanted to do some traveling for a while, but just didn't have the money available to him, and getting qualified to teach English gave him an opportunity to see some more exotic areas of the world, whilst getting paid for it. We were gutted to hear the news. He was one hell of a sniper. Many times, we'd be pinned down by some enemy machine gunner, only for the gunfire to stop suddenly, followed by a little laugh from Colin, and have that you twat, in his Scottish accent. We absolutely loved him for moments like that, but we were also happy for him, and since he promised to stay in the Discord server, we would be able to stay in touch and hear some stories of his adventures out in the tropics. So a few months go by, and we were enjoying hearing stories of his travels, along with being updated with photos of him exploring some remote parts of Indonesia. It was photos of him with school kids he was teaching that really made me smile though. He looked like he was having the time of his life, especially when we saw some videos of him teaching the kids some obscure English phrases. Not only that, but occasionally we would hear some of the kids repeat the phrases back in kind of like a Scottish accent. And the idea of a bunch of Indonesian kids learning to speak English with an Edinburgh accent was pretty hilarious to us. I mean, imagine it. Some American wishing an Indonesian fella good morning or something, only to hear his somewhat amusing accent in response. Still makes me chuckle even now, to be honest. Then, in September of 2018, I woke up to news that there had been an earthquake in the sea just off the coast of Indonesia, causing an earthquake that had resulted in a massive tsunami that had destroyed huge sections of the country. Immediately, I thought of Colin. I jumped into Discord using the app on my phone and sent him a message asking him if everything was alright, and hoping he had not been caught up in the tsunami. Obviously, there was a huge 7 or 8 hour time difference between the UK and Southeast Asia, and occasionally, Colin didn't reply for hours. So the fact that he didn't immediately reply wasn't a massive concern to me. But he didn't reply all that day, to the point to where I started expressing concern to some of the other lads in the server, sharing the news of the tsunami with them and mentioning that I was worried for Colin. I thought that he might have been caught up in it. We knew from the stories online about the areas of Indonesia that had been affected, but we didn't know exactly where Colin was. Only that he was in some remote areas and didn't always have immediate access to Wi-Fi. Another reason for us not to immediately be worried. But he didn't reply for the next few days either. It got to the point where a week had gone by, and we had heard nothing back from him. No one had even seen Colin online since we had gotten the news of the tsunami. That's when we really started to worry. And as the days went by, we got more and more frightened that something had happened to him. It's around then that I started to go back through some of the messages he'd been sending over the past previous month or so. He had been all over Indonesia and had spent his first few weeks in the capital city of Jakarta, which had remained relatively unaffected by the earthquake and subsequent tsunami. But then I found out that he had traveled out to a place called Palu to teach English there, and as far as I could tell, that's where he had been the time of the disaster. I then cross-referenced the name of the place with the stories about the tsunami, and found out that it had been one of the worst affected by the destructive tidal wave that apparently reached 23 feet in height. 23 feet of rushing water that had destroyed pretty much everything in its path, and caused the deaths of over 15,000 people. And likely, Colin had been one of them. We were devastated, but the worst part is, even to this day we have had no closure about it. We knew Colin quite well, but he kept his online and personal life separate. We never knew his last name or the names of any of his family, so it's not like we could get in touch with them and find out if he really died or not, or to see any funeral arrangements or give our condolences. But I think the fact that even now, his Discord account lies inactive is evidence of the fact that he did lose his life out there. Maybe he's okay, and he just never bothered to get back on Discord. Maybe his close encounter with death made him realize that video games were just a waste of time or something. But I think that's just wishful thinking on my part. In my heart of hearts, I know he's gone. I just hope he's at peace now, and whatever family he had are okay. Rest in peace, Colin. We still miss you, mate. I'm going to start off by saying all Tinder dates aren't so bad. I mean, I met my boyfriend of 4 years on there. I got lucky. But this story is one of the bad ones. So I was on Tinder one day and matched with this guy. We'll call him Jonah, just because I honestly forgot his name. I was really bored that day and wanted to find someone to hang out with. After a few hours of back and forth, he messaged me. Hey, want to come over? I'm babysitting my sister because my parents went out, and I can't leave her alone. Mind if we hang out here? I let him know it's no problem. Mistake number one. I just had matched with him that same day. I get ready. It's probably about 7:30 and I leave my house. I get to his house and he isn't as cute as the pictures. I mean, I guess I didn't really mind because we all find angles that make us look better. I say hi and he says his sister is up in her room, but we can hang out in the family room. I sit on the couch and notice he is a little nervous, but I was nervous too meeting someone for the first time. We talk for a bit about life and work, and then I ask for some water. He brings me a glass of water. I was not going to drink water like that. I was hoping for a water bottle. We were talking and he seemed extremely nervous. He was sweating a lot. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was, but he wanted to tell me something. He said, well, I'm looking for someone to, dominate. I was shocked, and I didn't really say a word. He then went on explaining what he would expect of me, and he would give me money, but only if I do everything he wanted. I still didn't say anything to him. I was still in shock and trying to process exactly what I was hearing. He took my hand and said, let me show you. I still did not say anything, as I was trying to process what was happening. He then took me to a room where he had 3 ties hanging up, like men's church ties. He said, pick one. I did not move or speak. He grabbed one off the wall and turned me around and tied my first hand. At this point, I am still frozen and shocked. I can't talk and I can't fight. But something inside of me suddenly snapped, and I snap out of it and tell him to let me go. He thinks I'm playing, but I yell and say, let me go. He unties me, and I quickly get out of that room and go grab my jacket and head to the door. You know that feeling you get when you're going up the stairs from the basement and you feel like someone's going to grab you? Well, I had that same feeling leaving out the door. I thought he was going to grab me and pull me back into his house at any moment. I ran to my car and locked the doors so fast. I texted my friends sitting there shaking exactly what happened. I had to let them know where I was, and I had to calm down before driving. This might not sound so scary to some people, but I've seen way too many documentaries and I didn't want to end up like one of those poor girls or guys you see. So please, be safe out there while on Tinder, and don't go to people's houses on the first date. I'm an audiophile. Always have been and always will be. I also play a fair amount of online video games too, ones where it's crucial to have clean, crisp audio. In games where you are reliant on hearing other players' footsteps, having that kind of audio quality gives you a real edge over the other players. That's why I had my heart set on the Bose A20 Aviation headset. They were without a doubt the best gaming headphones on the market, and at just under $1,000, they took a lot of work to afford. I had to work 10 months at a local gas station, including weekends, saving just a few bucks each time until I could finally afford them. But when the delivery guy had finally dropped them off, and I carefully unboxed them and plugged them into my iPhone for a music test, I discovered they were well worth the wait. The depth and range they produced were phenomenal. I heard songs in ways I had never heard them before. But most importantly, I couldn't wait to see how they improved my gaming performance. A few hours later, a buddy of mine and I were playing a game called Hunt Showdown. Apologies for the tangent, but it's a terrifying experience. It's set in the swamps of post-Civil War Louisiana. The game has all kinds of monsters to hunt and take bounties from, but not without a little competition from other players. There's heavy emphasis on stealth, sneaking up on monster hunters before mercilessly dispatching them and robbing them of their prize. Hence why I was so excited at using such high-quality audio gear. I was certain it'd give me and my buddy a crucial edge. I was only partially right, though. The quality of the headphones just made the game more terrifying. I could hear every little footstep, every creak of a door opening or a rifle reloading. At one point, I was about to ask my buddy if he had opened a door in the place we were hiding. I turned to see some black figure, holding a fire axe above his head. I screamed down the mic as the sickening crunch of the axe impacted with his skull, echoing around my ears. My friend was already gone. It was intense, seriously intense, and it was every bit as amazing as I imagined it would be, so obviously, we spent hours hammering out a round after round. And not once did I take the things off. Usually after a few hours, wearing a pair of headphones can get kind of uncomfortable. But these things had foam padding in all kinds of places, ergonomically designed not to cause any kind of discomfort. I swear, I could wear those things all night, just plugging the wireless connector into my phone, TV, laptop, anything and everything. I was kind of disappointed when it came to the end of the night and my buddy logged off to sleep. I stayed up for a few more hours testing out each game I had and seeing how the new headset enhanced the audio. And not once was I disappointed. I remember finally logging out and taking the headset off before checking my phone. Strangely enough, I had like 4 or 5 missed calls from an unknown number, and my phone wasn't even on silent. It had been ringing and vibrating over on my coffee table at multiple times throughout the evening, and not once as I heard it. These were seriously impressive. The noise cancellation was very effective. I knew that every penny spent on that headset was worth it. Only, that's about the time my phone buzzed again. The same unknown number text popping up on the screen. It was the sheriff department, and on the other end of the line, a lady deputy was asking me if I had been home that night. My first thought was just what the hell had happened and how they had gotten my number. But I guess the cop just have access to info like that. Or at least, that's what my brain thought. But I answered the lady's question and told her, sure, I'd been home all night. That answer seemed to confuse her a bit. All night? She asked again. And again I reiterated that, yes, I had been home all night playing video games. When I asked her why she was calling, she seems just to answer a question with a question. We've had deputies hammering on your apartment door for the last 4 hours. And you didn't hear us? Not even once? Then it hit me. I had had my new headset on, not only that the volume was all the way up, not a usual thing I do, but like I said, I was testing out the noise cancellation. I sighed before I started on my long-winded explanation as to why I had not heard them calling. I felt kind of dumb having not heard them, and wondered if I had been in danger at any point, totally oblivious to the home invader attempting to break in. all while I'm just sitting there, gaming in total ignorance. Only when I asked what had happened, it was worse than I ever could have imagined. There had indeed been a break-in, only it obviously wasn't my apartment. It was the one above. A guy had busted into the apartment of the girl that lived up there with the intention of robbing her. According to the cops, she had resisted, trying to fight the guy off, but that hadn't gone well for her. Not in the least bit. The home invader had tortured her at first, trying to get her to confess where she had money or jewelry hidden. When it turned out she didn't have any, he beat her to death in frustration. This whole thing happened without me hearing so much as a iota of noise from above. I'd been there, happily playing PC games and talking to people online, with someone being murdered right above me. If only I had taken them off for 5 minutes. If only I had stopped fawning over them for a little while. That girl might still be alive. It's taken me quite a while to get over it. I moved out of that apartment and back into my parents' house. At least I could find a better place to live later. I also sold the headset too, not losing too much money in the process. But sometimes, I feel like I would have been happy to throw those things in a lake, even if I did work the better part of a year to be able to afford them. What makes it all worse is that it wasn't some random accident. My greed, my own selfishness, that's what killed that girl. That scumbag psychopath might have been the one that murdered her, but I was the one that nailed her coffin shut. So I'm a big PC gamer, and I played a lot of online stuff with my mates. But the corona hits and my gaming time shoots up like tenfold. Lack of hours at work, social distancing, basically a bunch of stuff contributes to me playing a hell of a lot more than usual. So me and a few of my mates are using Discord voice chat one night while we're on Overwatch, just blazing through round after round, when a mate of ours, Phil's, starts doing something bloody weird. So at one point, we hear what sounds like whispering noises coming from someone's mic. I remember just ignoring it at first, until it was so frequent that we start calling it out like, who the hell is whispering down the mic? It's hella creepy. No one wants to initially own up to it, which just sort of makes me laugh it off at first, partly out of being genuinely amused, and partly just out of nervousness, because it was legit creepy that no one was owning up to it. But it carries on even after someone calls it out again, so I ended up checking Discord, watching all the little icons until the whispering starts up again. It was coming from Phil's mic, and now that I was seeing it for real, it did sound kind of like Phil's voice. So I'm like, yo Phil, stop whispering dude, it's creepy. What are you, possessed or something? But instead of being like, you got me, Phil insists he's not whispering. At first I just laughed again and was like, dude, I'm looking at everyone's icons, and I can see it's you. You can't fool me here. But again, Phil is insistent that he's not whispering, then actually whispers after he speaks, genuinely, like he's doing it to take the piss. Again, I'm confronting him, laughing like, dude, you just did it again. Only, he just gets more angry and tells me I don't know what I'm talking about, and that he's not doing any whispering. That's when the whole mood changes. We can hear in his voice that he is deadly serious, that he himself believes he's not whispering, even though he blatantly is. I mean, it was either an Oscar-winning performance out of our junk rat-playing friend, or he seriously believed he was not whispering. And God love him, but Phil is no actor. Either way, the mood got super tense in the voice chat, and it wasn't brought up again. To this day, I have no idea what was going on there. He doesn't play with us much anymore, so it's not like we really get the chance to hear the whispering all that often. I don't know if it was a mental problem or whatever, but it honestly was the creepiest moment I've ever had in a Discord voice call. I mean, stomach-droppingly creepy. So, wherever you are, Phil, whatever you're up to, I hope you're doing better, mate. I really do. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking guy, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck on there either, until the 3rd month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough, and I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was generic, but wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for about a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was reluctant. She lived nearly 8 hours away from me by car, but I had to admit, I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt that she was who she said she was. Everything appeared legit online. We had video chatted every other week and called most days. I just assumed I got lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there, though. She kept messaging me the entire time, asking me where I was and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she would send me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was nervous too, so I couldn't put too much blame on her. I have never met anybody online either, so this was new. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came into view of an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned. Just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took a look at my phone and texted her that I was there. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car and to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from the second floor window. I found it a bit creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise, or—" Katie looked confused and told me her dad wasn't there. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said we had to get out of there now. We both ran to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad was not there, and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone, giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed at the window where I'd seen the guy last. He was looking at us from the window again. I got a better look at him. He seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after we saw him. Looked like he kind of scurried away. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back a little bit later and told me and Katie that they didn't find anyone. They did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had probably ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure that the house was empty. After the cops had left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was scared and shaking. She didn't want to be in her house alone that night. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch as Katie's bed was in the room next to the one the man had been seen in. Katie had also brought out her shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her it was fine. The man was gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if she had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of the doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was more just angry. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door. And there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad the door was locked. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened, and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it was probably a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house and I was going home. I left a few minutes after Katie did. I was on my phone with my brother telling him about what happened. My headlights were on, and as I was talking, something caught my eye. There he was, Once again, the man standing at the corner of the house just watching me. I gunned it out of there, and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think Katie ever went back to that house though, at least not alone. I am sending this in as a warning to myself and others to never underestimate how fast the weather can change. It is a common mistake, but in some cases it can be very costly. This was my experience making that mistake. I live in the Midwest, specifically Iowa, so I grew up around severe storms and have always been fascinated by the weather and what it can do. I even took a year's worth of meteorology when I was in high school, and I continue to study it to this day. Now, going storm chasing has been on my bucket list for a very long time, but I was only able to really get a chance to do it recently, as before I was very busy paying off college debt and taking care of family matters. But a few weeks ago, my chance had come. I had a week's worth of paid time off, and I was going to put it to use and finally see my first tornado. But ironically, the days I had specifically set aside to go storm chasing, somehow the entirety of Tornado Alley was completely clear. After 2 days of beautiful clear weather, I decided to throw in the towel, and when my parents asked if I could come out for a quick visit during my time off, I decided to go see them for a day. A good friend of mine also tagged along. We were roommates during our freshman year of college and always enjoyed hanging out. Our trip was uneventful, and I had a good visit with my family. Towards the evening, my friend and I got ready to leave, but one of my brothers had asked if I could come see him where he worked before I left, so I obliged and went to see him. On our way out of my hometown, I spotted a massive supercell to the east, which immediately made me uneasy. For those of you who may not know, a supercell is a very large thunderstorm that can produce large hail, strong winds, intense lightning, and, when the conditions are just right, tornadoes. They are most easily recognized by their round, anvil shape, and when you see any rotation towards the bottom of the supercell, that's a good sign it may spawn a tornado. I'll leave you all to Google photos of these. Now, my buddy and I were watching the supercell as we were making our way south towards the interstate, and I could easily see the storm was moving west. And we were in the crosshairs. However, I knew that we would be heading west to get home, and could probably outrun it since we were on the interstate. So I pressed on, only making one stop to see my dad as he works for a farmer and had been very busy the past few days trying to get the crops in. Once we were back on the road, I made my friend check a weather radar app I have on my phone so I could see how fast the storm was moving. When the radar image appeared on the screen, I was shocked to see a line of severe thunderstorms all along the interstate from Iowa City to Des Moines. Still, I know all about the driving in bad weather, and I was confident that I could handle whatever that storm could throw at me. So we kept our course and drove straight into the teeth of the large storms. As we approached the storm, I could see it was very large and that the sky was pitch black with flashes of lightning every couple of seconds. My friend and I were getting more and more excited by the minute as we pushed onwards, as thunderstorms at night can be spectacular. The lightning this storm was generating was some of the most intense I had ever seen. Then we went into the storm. Darkness enveloped us, with the only lights being the lights on the cars and trucks around us and the occasional street lights along the road. But the strange thing was that despite the lightning being even more intense now, there was little wind and no rain. I guessed that the lightning could be generated by the heat and humidity, as it had been a rather hot day, and we had nothing to worry about. So we pressed onwards. Now I admit driving makes me hungry, and I was thinking about stopping alongside the route for milkshakes, but due to the storm, I put that thought on hold while I kept my focus on the road and my trusty old pickup, making sure all the gauges were in the green. That's when I saw I was at 3/4 of a tank. I thought while I could make it to our destination without stopping to refuel, I didn't want to take the chance of running out and having the storm unleash its full might on us while we were stranded. So I stopped in a town called Williamsburg to top my tank off before proceeding. As I exited the interstate, the lightning was still flashing in the sky as intense as ever, but the wind and rain were nowhere to be seen. I pulled into the gas station and began to fill my truck with fuel. After I started the pump, I felt the call of nature and had my friend watch the truck as I went inside the gas station to empty my bladder and check in with my parents. After I finished, I walked back outside and I could see that it was starting to rain. It wasn't raining very hard, so I thought nothing of it. My friend was sitting inside my truck, so I climbed inside and glanced at my phone. The weather radar was still on, and I could see that we were in the middle of the largest storm in the chain of storms along the interstate, and yet it had decided to continue to hold back its power. My friend looked over at me and asked, "Are you sure we should keep going?" I responded, "Oh yes, it takes a lot more than light rain to keep me from getting home." Almost as if the storm had heard my comment and took it as a challenge, our surroundings quickly changed as winds picked up in mere seconds and rocked my truck, and walls of rain began to pound the roof as we were still parked in the gas station. I had started the engine and began to drive around the station looking for a good place to park and be out of the wind as it continued to gain strength. My friend was starting to get scared, and I was getting nervous. I knew that the conditions we were experiencing were very similar to what's known as the bear's cage to storm chasers. The bear's cage was the area that formed very close to tornadoes. I knew that with it being dark, we may have no way of seeing a tornado until it was far too late. After making a complete circle around the station, the storm had reached its peak, and I knew we were not safe in my truck anymore. I parked the truck with the tailgate against the wind as there were no other places to park. My friend reached for the door handle and I had to tell him to stop. With the strong winds, if we opened the doors at the wrong time, the winds would damage them and even rip them off the hinges. We had to wait for the winds to lessen before we could make our exit if we wanted the best chance for our only ride back to be in one piece. Just then I see a large black shape appear out of the walls of my rain in the mirror. It was a semi-truck that had pulled in behind us. Its trailer was giving us some protection from the wind and a chance to break for the shelter of the gas station. We bolted from the truck and ran into the station, getting completely drenched in the process. Once we got inside the station, the power went out, leaving us in the dark with the storm still screeching outside. A few seconds later, we heard the sound that I had been dreading, the tornado siren. The gas station employees quickly shouted for everyone to get inside the restrooms, as that was their best shelter. Once the 15 or so people were crammed into the restrooms, a manager from the adjoining diner came in and said that they had a basement that we could use instead, and we all hustled to get to a lower level. As we hurried over, I saw several old farmers still at their tables eating their dinners in the darkness. I knew that this was not their first rodeo, and that if something bad would happen, they would join us. After descending into the basement and finding it was in fact an old wine cellar, that the little group of refugees had began to introduce themselves and chat. I look at the radar and see the storm was gradually moving south and that so far there were no tornadoes spotted in the area. I then looked at my watch and figured out to my shock the storm had gone from awesome lightning show to a dangerously high winds and walls of rain in less than 3 minutes. My friend and I each contacted our families and let them know we were safe for the time being. As we waited for the storm to pass, I remember hearing the diner manager talking to some of the other stranded travelers that a similar storm had hit them last year, and that while they were hunkered down in the 2 cellars, the ladies quietly broke into bottles of wine and were stored there, and eventually became so drunk they had to be carried out of the basement. This little story seemed to lighten the mood a bit and raise the spirits of everybody there. After 20 minutes of sitting in that dark basement, my friend and I decided to head above ground to see if the storm had finally let up. Once we got into the dining room, I could see the old farmers were still in their places, watching the storm slowly begin to subside. My friend and I waited another 10 minutes before we made our way outside and back to my truck. Once I saw it, I was happy to see the only damage was some dings and scratches on the tailgate, and it almost appeared to have been pushed a few inches forward by the wind. We got inside and started it up without a problem, and made our way out of the lot. But before we left, we spotted the same semi that gave us our opportunity to escape and get to better shelter. After thanking the trucker for his help, we got back onto the interstate. Within minutes of getting back on the interstate, we spotted a semi that had been blown over on its side by the winds. Thankfully, I could see the person, I assume, who was the driver, talking to some state troopers who had come to assist the trucker. While the lightning never seemed to stop, the wind and rain were done, and my friend and I made it back to our home safely. As I lay in bed, I realized the mistake I had made. I underestimated the storm. My hands began to shake as I realized what could have happened if anything had happened differently.
and I knew that my guardian angels were watching out for us that night. So I learned that lesson, the very hard lesson that many others have made. Some people who underestimate the weather aren't so lucky. There are many people who are killed every year for their own foolish wishes. Yes, I know the weather can be a spectacular thing to watch, but if you don't respect what it can do, it will make you pay. Someone like me is lucky. I got off easy with little to no damage. Others aren't, and some don't walk away. For context, I'm an 18-year-old girl from a small, wealthy area of England. I have always prided myself on being independent and aware of my surroundings. As a result, I have naively believed I would never get myself in dangerous situations. This was all to change last summer, when my parents and brother went on holiday, leaving me home alone for around a week. I was very happy about this, as I often argue with my family and cannot wait to live alone when I'm older. It was in the middle of summer and very hot for England, which usually means we have thunderstorms. It was the second night of being on my own, and I was watching horror films late into the night. It was storming really bad. I usually love everything horror related and plan what I would do in these situations. Little did I know I would be faced with a similar situation in just a few hours. I was more scared than usual. We live in an old house but with a large extension on the back, which has an entire wall of glass and windows on the ceiling. For some reason, we don't have curtains on them, so at night you can't see anything out of them, but anything outside has a clear view. Usually this doesn't really bother me, but being on my own, after watching countless horror films and raging lightning and thunder, I was rather anxious. Anyway, I went to sleep at around 1:30. Side note, I have always slept with my curtains open in my bedroom. This stems from the idea that if someone or something was outside, I prefer to see it rather than not knowing what's there. It was about 3 a.m., and I woke up to banging at the door. Very loud, slow banging at my front door. My initial thought was, what the heck? I first thought it was one of my mates who were drunk and they wanted to come around or something. Then my mind switches to the possibility that my neighbors, whose house is attached to mine, have had a problem and maybe they needed to tell me. But something about the knocking suggested otherwise, and I remained frozen in my bed. I messaged all my friends and told them to stop messing with me, hoping one of them would admit to it. But no one replied. The banging continued. 10 minutes of this passed, but it felt like an hour. I creep into my mom's room to see if I can see who it is, but I could not. After 20 minutes, I'm confident they've gone, and I try to go back to bed, but I'm unable to sleep. It is now 4 a.m, and something happens that makes me almost throw up in fear. Banging. Again, but it's different this time. The banging is on glass. They are in my back garden. My back garden is not accessible from the front, so they would have had to climb over or go into the garage. My heart stops. I know that if I go downstairs, I will be completely visible. At this point, I start calling everyone I know that's nearby, but no one's picking up. My fear is that they could get on top of the extension, which is only 1 story high, and then could simply walk up to my bedroom window, which has very thin old glass, and they would do God knows what to me. Realizing this, I slowly go to my bathroom, which seems to be the safest place but also allows me to view the person in my garden. I can see the figure of a man, dressed in what I can only make out to be a pinstriped suit, with gelled back hair, just standing on the deck, completely still, staring into the dim light from my house, smiling psychotically. I could not recognize the person. They seemed to be about 30 years old, tall and slim. He did not seem to be holding a weapon or trying to get in, just standing there, in my back garden. He must have been there for about an hour. Suddenly my phone rings and it's one of my guy friends who says he's on his way to my house. I stay exactly where I am for about 10 minutes or so. I refuse to get up from where I was, so I stay on the phone while my friend looks around the house and garden. He says there's no one there, and I'm safe to open the door. As I come downstairs, I see what must have been about 50 little sticky notes on pink paper that have been posted through the letterbox. As I bend down, I realize they have all handwritten messages on them.
I can see you, Delilah.
I opened the door and my friend came in. As the sun started to rise, we called the police and reported the incident. The police searched the property and said that it was going to be very hard for them to find the person, but that they expected it is someone looking to scare rather than to cause harm. I slept around friends for the remainder of my parents' holiday, and even now, a year later, I'm still terrified of what happened. And although nothing serious went down, the fact that he knew my name and could have easily gotten in still sends shivers down my spine. I got home late last night, which in my apartment complex means all the good parking spots are taken. So, I parked a good distance from my apartment and began walking towards it. There's a thunderstorm rolling in and it's not quite raining yet, so the air has energy and smells great. I decided to take my time and make a loop around my building and come up behind it. As I make the corner and begin walking back down towards my apartment, I see a guy coming out of the parking lot between two cars. We nod and I slowly pace and he begins walking ahead of me. But I noticed he was slowing down to match my pace. So I start going even slower. I intended to cut the corner as soon as we approach it and enter my apartment as soon as possible. The front door is right on the corner. He seems reluctant to walk too far ahead of me, so I'm already on alert. He approaches the corner first, and I come around. He's at my apartment door shaking my doorknob. He looks at me as I round the corner and he says, "I lost my keys." The realization that he was lying, and the implication of the lie slammed every one of my systems into high alert. Everything in me told me not to stop, so I kept on walking and gave him a sympathetic smile. He turns and stares at me and then asks if I have a phone he can borrow. At this point, I'm feeling stuck and panicking. He's pretending that he lives in my apartment, so I can't really just barge past him. My car is too far away and in the dark, and any sudden movements will alert him that I'm on to him. So I tell him my phone died, which caused my heart to immediately skip a beat because now he thinks I can't call the cops. I walked one door over and started knocking on the door. It's past midnight. The guy is standing at my doorstep, just staring at me. After an eternity, my neighbor opened up, who I'm on a "hey, how are you" and "nice night out" speaking terms. I immediately say, "Hey, Kevin," and push past him into his apartment. I immediately turned and closed the door and locked it. I explained to my neighbor what was happening, and he went to go get his gun and call the cops. But the guy was gone, and now I'll never be able to walk around my apartment complex at night without constantly looking over my shoulder. I've been debating sharing this story for a while now, but after listening to the show for a long time, I decided to finally do it. So back in the summer of 2018, I was attending the summer German school at the University of Konstanz in Germany. For those of you who do not know, Konstanz was one of the only major German cities during the war to avoid destruction during the war due to its straddling the Swiss border. So it has one of the last remaining medieval districts in Germany. At the heart of the old town is the Cathedral, an old Gothic building with foundations dating back to the early conversion to Christianity. So this building is ancient. I, being a historian of the early modern periods, specifically witch trials, was in love with the city and would spend most of my afternoons and evenings after class wandering the old town and enjoying the Renaissance art of the cathedral. I was at the post office near the cathedral one morning, mailing postcards, when suddenly a massive storm began. I had only brought a light jacket with me, and I didn't feel like getting soaked on my way back to my flat, or waiting at the post office, so I jogged to the cathedral to wait out the torrential downpour. By the time I got to the cathedral and entered the massive medieval wooden doors, I felt something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Almost like a sense of dread, which I'd never felt before in this building. As I was waiting on one of the aisles of the cathedral, the thunder started to build and clap, louder and louder every few minutes, echoing in the nave. Then, out of the blue, the enormous church organ started to play above me, terrifying in its suddenness and its volume. That was when I recognized the feeling of dread. I wasn't alone in this feeling. The other people around me all jumped when they heard the first note was played and was glancing around nervously. Midway through the song, people started milling around again, enjoying the building, and I calmed down a bit. I too figured the dread was just in my imagination, so I took up my phone and recorded a short video, trying to capture the dark and brooding ambience of the building and the music in the storm. Soon after, the music faded, and the storm moved out over the lake and away from the city. I headed back to my flat, but once again, when I went to send the video to my friends, they received it, but they were confused. There was no sound, just silence. I was shocked, because it had been such a vivid experience for me. So I tried playing the video and the album on my phone, and they were right. It was completely silent. No organ, no thunder, not even my own breathing. Just absolute silence. I tried recording another video here in my flat, and it worked perfectly fine, sound and all. My phone was brand new, and I have never had any issues with it before. I don't know. I've had no issues ever since either. The sense of dread I'd felt earlier returned, and I could barely sleep that night because of it. Every time I returned to the cathedral after that, I hoped for a similar response. No matter the weather, no matter the time of day, the feeling never came back. I like to think of myself as a logical and rational person, but that was something I just cannot explain. I don't know how the organ started playing by itself, or why it was being played in the middle of a thunderstorm anyway, with no service going on. But for whatever reason, it caused my phone to malfunction and gives me a lingering sense of dread every single time I think about it. For reference, I'm a female in my late 20s, and about a week ago, I had an unsettling encounter. The city I live in is surrounded by a reserved set of land put aside by the city planners. It's just a forest of pine trees. I usually walk my dogs up in that area closest to me, which is about 10 minutes away from the middle of town. It's one of my favorite places to go, but now, honestly, I'm nervous about going in that area alone. The city is usually a pretty safe spot, and I've never had any concerns out by myself, even in the dark, and I've been in the forest when it's dark many times with no incident. The track where I access the forest is at the top of a dead-end street, through a park with a playground, and up a long series of steps, so it's quite secluded to say the least. I have 2 dogs, an older one and one that's about a year old. They're a working breed, so very high energy, although the older one is now arthritic and doesn't need much exercise, but the younger one needs a huge amount of off-leash exercise daily, which is why I was out on this particular evening. The older dog is also very shy and has a nervous disposition. It was after work in winter, so the sun had just gone down. It was also bad weather, nearly a storm and raining, although the trees shelter you from most of the rain. I get into the forest and let my dogs off the leash. We meet a couple of other people, also with high-energy dogs, along the way. As I was walking along one of the tracks, my dogs were up ahead of me, running up and down the banks at the sides of the track, and I noticed up ahead there was a man sitting on a seat. I could see he was dressed in a dark blue track pant and leather jacket, over a hooded jersey. His head was down, staring at the ground. His hood was up, and I couldn't see his face. He was sitting there in the rain, and I immediately got bad vibes from him. I tried to shake it off as just someone out for a walk, but decided to stay alert just in case. A few minutes later, the older dog looked back at something behind me and then just bolted, clearly spooked, running in the direction of the playground. I'd never seen her run away like that before, and the younger dog ran after her. I yelled for her to come back, but she was gone. The younger one comes back when I call, but keeps running up ahead of me. I start to get really nervous. I start thinking about that man again. But the more I think about my dog running away, I'm just so off track here. I don't know what to do. The track I am on makes a large loop before ending back at the playground, but the track below led straight back, so I quickly climb down and I try to get after my dog. I'm not running because I have ruined my back over the years, so I'm walking as fast as I can. The track is muddy and slippery, so it's slow going. By this time, it got pretty dark, and it's raining. When I get near the steps, I see both of the dogs sitting there, and they come running up to me very excited. Relieved, I turn around and the man is right behind me. He had to have run or followed me down the bank to get there that quickly. I realized that I needed to get back to a populated area, and I head back down the steps as fast as I can. When I get to the bottom of the steps, I put the dogs back on the leash and the younger dog starts growling for the first time in his life, and I glance back. The man is halfway down the steps, and when he suddenly stops and proceeds to tie his shoelace out of nowhere, I get a weird feeling. I keep looking at him while my dog is still growling. He shoots me a long, angry look, then turns around and walks back to the steps into the darkness of the forest. Nothing bad, luckily, actually happened to me, but it really got my adrenaline pumping, and I can only guess what might have happened if I didn't have my dogs with me. At least the younger one. The older one was absolutely useless in any sort of protection capacity.
This past September, I had taken a road trip down to Myrtle Beach with my family. It was myself, my mother, my sister, her husband, and their 2 kids. We had used my car and both my sister and husband's car to transport everything and all of us. We had rented a beach house for a little over a week and had a pretty great time. I was in the middle of a difficult point in my life and struggling with employment and being in between jobs and having just started 2 new fresh jobs. I was a little low on funds and worried about making my car payments and the like, so I opted to head home 2 days early with my car so I could try and get some more hours at work. My family expressed being nervous as I planned to leave after dinner and drive through the night to get home. I consoled them and told them that I would be okay and I'd be up all night. I'd head straight home and only stop for gas and food as needed. I'm a pretty good driver. A tad impatient, so I tend to go until I absolutely had to stop and take a break. However, this would be a 12-hour trip, and I knew I would need breaks. So I made a point to stop at every rest stop and at least go out and stretch, so I stayed awake and didn't get too sore. As I was going through West Virginia, if you're not aware, these rest stops here are very secluded. The visitor centers and everything, they're not very, how can I say this, popular. Especially when you're heading north from the south. Going through the mountains, I stopped at a visitor center because they advertised having a fast food joint and I had to pee like a racehorse. This was sometime very late at night, maybe between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., I'm not entirely sure. Side note that sent shivers down my spine after what happened. I like to drive barefoot, so keep that in mind. So, I pulled in. I noticed the buildings with the fast food were closed, so I drove around the lot and parked under a streetlight in front of the visitor center, so I could at least use the restroom. Leaning out of my car door, I took my time putting my shoes on to walk inside. Having looked around and not seeing anything out of the ordinary, I checked my phone and grabbed my wallet before standing up to walk in, making sure my car horn beeped to signal my doors were locked. Walking towards the center, I saw a man in a white hoodie standing at the edge of the sidewalk leading into the center. I didn't think much of it. Why would I? Until I passed him and got a very weird vibe. For some reason, I glanced to my left as I turned to face forward and noted another man sitting at the benches that were on the other side of a tall, thin set of bushes. Instantly, I thought, nope. I went in, peed, and before I walked out of the bathroom, I called my roommate. As dumb as it was, because he was a good 4 to 6 hours away, I just felt safer giving the information to someone. I gave him a quick rundown of my situation and made him stay on the phone with me. I started to walk out and I couldn't see the man at the front of the sidewalk anymore. I glanced to my now right and saw both men standing next to a bench. Facing forward, I saw a couple walking in presumably to use the restroom as well. I had an impulse to ask them to walk with me, but my paranoia kicked in because I knew something was wrong somewhere in my situation, and I didn't want to ask, thinking that they might know the men. Walking briskly to my car, I explained to my roommate what the men were doing, and that they were by the benches now. Daring the smallest of peeks over my shoulder again, I saw the man in the white hoodie start making his way towards me. I told my roommate. Walking a few more paces forward, I looked back again and saw his pace had quickened. At this point, I told my roommate he's following me to my car, and I booked it. I thankfully had a key fob, got my key out, and already had my door unlocked and my car fully ready to get out of there in just a moment's time. Not daring another glance back, I threw my car in reverse and gunned it backwards before going back into drive and sped off.
I didn't even stop to put my seatbelt on until I was already at the exit, leaving the parking lot. I didn't look back one time. I honestly was pretty freaked out. I'm pretty sure I never stopped until I got to the next toll road and filed a report, and the workers called for the state troopers to head over there to check things out. I didn't stop shaking for hours, and I refused to get out of my car until I was home. I horrified myself with the thought of, if those guys had paid attention and made their move more quickly, they could have incapacitated me before I even got to my car. I don't know. I was pretty creeped out, and I'm happy that nothing worse happened.
Hi, Swamp Dweller. This story occurred last October and was my encounter with one of Texas's oldest unsolved mysteries, the Marfa lights. It may not be as terrifying as many of the other stories submitted here, but it was a unique experience for me. On some nights, as you look across the West Texan desert outside the town of Marfa, you may see strange orbs of red, white, or yellow lights floating above the desert floor. You may only see one or two, or sometimes several in the air at one time. Sometimes they hover perfectly still before blinking out, or they move, even shoot across the night sky. They are unpredictable in nature. Stories and sightings of the lights go well back into the 1800s. There are even Native American legends about the mysterious lights, and many researchers have run studies to try and determine their cause. The leading theory is that the unique atmospheric conditions cause headlights from the cars to be reflected in the sky, but a lot of people don't really buy that. While on a road trip with some friends from university out west to experience the beauty of the Chihuahuan Desert, we decided it would be nice to visit the area. About 10 miles outside of Marfa, we were staying in a nice little hotel. One of my favorite hobbies was going birdwatching, so I brought my big spotting scope on the trip, which I planned to use to see the lights better. We arrived about a half an hour after the sun set. If you've ever been that far into the desert, it gets dark, incredibly dark. The only source of light was the dim lights on the steps of the viewing area, the stars, and a single cell tower out in the distance. I set up my scope and sighted in on the cell tower. We didn't have to wait long before a white small light appeared on the horizon. It moved slowly across the horizon before blinking out. Then another one appeared, and another. Sometimes they would go out after a minute. Other times they would be visible for 5 or more minutes. Whenever I would focus my scope on one, I wasn't able to see any discernible features other than a small blip of light. Another strange thing was that whenever I would crank the zoom on my scope, the lights would never seem any larger than when looking at them with the naked eye. We stayed out for about an hour, and I was absolutely entranced by the little lights, and that wasn't the only time we had seen them on that road trip. A couple of days later, when we were returning from a big hike in Big Bend, it was a long drive back, so it was dark by the time we were getting back to Marfa. Driving through the desert at night is surreal. You can go 100 miles and hardly see a thing. It's like the world drops out of existence beyond the reach of your headlights. And when we passed the viewing platform that we were at a couple of nights before, we saw about a half dozen white, red, and yellow lights way out in the desert. The most we had ever seen at once. Where it got weird was when I turned around in my seat. I saw a little reddish light behind us. There was only one single one, so I don't think it was a car. From my best guess, I'd say it was about a half mile behind us, maybe 25 to 50 feet off the ground. I thought it could have been a motorcycle, but then it started moving perpendicular to the straight road we were on. It followed us for probably about 10 minutes or so, and from what I could tell, it kept the same distance the entire time. And then, out of nowhere, it suddenly disappeared. We all said stuff along the lines of, well, that was weird, and none of us had ever seen anything like it. And 2 of the people in the car had been out there multiple times and seen the lights many times. We didn't feel threatened by it, I guess, but it was a cool experience that not many people have had while seeing the lights. If any of y'all are in West Texas, be sure to stop by Marfa and see if you can catch a glimpse of these weird lights. People have said they're ghosts, aliens, car lights, or even electricity caused by rocks under the area. But I really hope that the mystery of the Marfa lights is never truly solved. We need a few more mysteries in the world, I'm from California, and way back when I was on the college search, I realized that I'd likely go out to the East Coast if I wanted to play field hockey. My mom and I organized a road trip through Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island to hit a bunch of different schools in a short amount of time. One of those schools was Ithaca College. It was a last-minute decision to stop there, so we didn't have much time to explore the general area afterwards. We had been told by multiple people that the waterfalls in the area were beyond gorgeous and worth the stop, so my mom and I decided to swing by one before we left for Pennsylvania. We put Ithaca Falls in our rental car GPS, and it brought us to this red curb loop with an old, run-down overlook. This overlook was down a hill and through some trees, so my mom didn't really want to leave the car on the red curb. She encouraged me to go down and check it out on my own, and I did. The first time I went down, I was sure to be observant of everything around me. I didn't want any random people or any animals in the woods sneaking up on me. I went to the ledge to take some pics, sat and listened for the water, then turned to go back up. When I turned, I got this odd feeling as if something was wrong, like I was being watched or something was standing behind me. I got incredibly uncomfortable and looked around and saw nothing, and nothing really appeared to be out of the ordinary. So I calmly headed back up the hill. I got in the car, showed my mom the photos, and realized I never took a video. My mom suggests I go back down to get a video. We've got time. So, again, I go back down. The second time I go down, I feel a little less happy. I was down a slope, so my mom couldn't see me. I felt more alone and exposed than the time before, and that sinking feeling of being watched kept growing. I got to the edge to take the video with shaking hands. Now I'm feeling like I need to get out of there. This intense sense of urgency was washing over me. I turn around to go back up, and some force stops me dead in my tracks. I'm frozen there, like a rabbit or a deer frozen in headlights. I literally cannot get myself to move another foot forward. I can't take a step, I'm just stuck there. An overwhelming sense of dread sweeps over my body once again, and presses on my chest. Just such dread. I literally feel like I'm going to die at any moment. I still can't move and sit there terrified as I feel a massive presence come up behind me. This thing felt big and so real, and yet I couldn't get away. I'm stuck and helpless. I keep standing there, too scared to turn around and unable to move, when the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This thing, this person, whatever it is, bends down toward me, and right next to my ear says, "Yoo-hoo." I kid you not. When I heard that, I ran faster than I ever have in my entire life. I tore up that hill, still too afraid to see what was behind me. I got in the car, slammed the door, and just like out of a movie, I yelled, "Drive!" My mom looks at me in disbelief and goes, "Is everything okay?" I just repeat, "Just drive!" She told me later that I was pale white and that I had the sense of urgency in my voice that told her that she had to get away from whatever I feared. What spooks me out so much about this story is that I never turned around. It felt so real that it could have been a person or who knows what, but I was right against that overlook. I don't think anyone could have snuck up behind me, and I've also gotten that sense of dread visiting other haunted places. I really feel that it was something paranormal. As for the yoo-hoo, it didn't sound male or female. I mean, I don't know. It sounded like something, as if it was trying to scare me or intimidate me. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments.
Rachel, Mindy, and Nathan were excited to finish their freshman year of college. They decided to take a road trip to an old campground that is known for its beautiful scenery. It is well off the beaten path, but so is anything else worth seeing. Nathan was driving as they turned off the main road. "Well, say goodbye to civilization," Nathan said. "I know. Isn't this awesome? Finally, no more assignments for a while," Mindy answered. "Right, Rachel?" Mindy turned to see Rachel fast asleep in the back seat. "I guess being on the dean's list is tiring," Nathan laughingly said. Mindy was staring out the window as it got quiet. As they drove deeper into the country, Mindy noticed the old house off in the distance. "Well, I didn't think anyone lived out here," Mindy said quietly. "They don't," Nathan replied. "There's a house right there. Looks creepy though," Mindy said. "That's because it is," Nathan replied. "What do you mean?" Mindy asked. "Off this old highway a few hundred yards down a dirt driveway, people who live around here know to stay away. The house has a bad history. Everyone has seen it. Everyone and anyone who has crossed the path from going from point A to point B has looked to the side at night and seen that lonely dark house riding by itself, although over the years it has gotten a fair amount of attention," said Nathan. "What kind of bad history?" Mindy asked. Nathan turned and looked at Mindy in her eyes and said with a seductive smile, "Do you really want to know?" Mindy laughed and answered back, "I sure do." Nathan sat back and took a deep breath. "I did a little research. In 1924, a family lived there. Apparently the father fell on hard times and went absolutely crazy. He killed his family, then brought their bones into the cellar with a shovel, and, nobody ever saw them again. Or him. So, he just closed the cellar door, and that was it?" Mindy said. "Yes, with a shovel." "God knows what he did down there," said Nathan. It was getting dark, and Mindy looked at the house as Nathan pulled over to use the bathroom. The setting sun cast an eerie light on the backdrop of the house. As Nathan got back and Misty looked at him, and as Nathan reached for the ignition, Mindy stopped him. "No, I want to see it," Mindy said. Nathan looked back at Rachel to see that she was still sleeping. Let's do it," Nathan said as he reached for Mindy. Mindy pushed him away. "No, I'm serious. I want to see the house. The inside of it. I want to see what happened," Mindy said as she looked into his eyes worriedly. Nathan could not believe it. "You're serious? You want to see what's inside?" he asked. "Yes," Mindy said as she held his arm. Nathan looked down at her and back up at her. Then Nathan looked at his watch and over at the house. "Okay, let's wake up Rachel." Mindy woke Rachel up and told her that they were going to do something awesome as Nathan got the backpacks ready to be carried. Mindy told Rachel she could stay in the van if she wanted to, and Rachel tried to talk her out of it. "Are you crazy? Why do you want to go see it?" Mindy told her she had to know what happened. "Why don't you just, go look for police records or something? Besides, that was 100 years ago. What if there's some crazy person in there?" Mindy rolled her eyes and began walking down the driveway as Nathan caught up with her. Rachel looked around as it was turning into night and hurried to catch up with them. As they got to the house, a loud thud came from inside. "See? There's someone in there. They know we're here," Rachel said. "It's an old house, probably rotting wood falling," Nathan said as he turned to Mindy and smiled. They reached the front door. As Nathan tried the knob, to their surprise, the door opened. It was dark and dusty. They couldn't see anything, so Nathan used his flashlight from his camping gear. They walked around examining things. Kids' toys, baby clothes, a straw hat, a tobacco pipe. "Looks like they just up and left," Nathan said. "I guess nobody bothered to try to clean up. They just let it all sit in here until the house collapses, huh?" "Yeah, well, they probably figured nobody would come in here," Rachel snapped. "Let's stay together," Nathan said as they made their way to the back of the house. When they made it to the back room, there was another thud. "Okay, guys, seriously, let's get out of here. That wasn't falling wood." Rachel turned to Nathan. "Nathan, please, let's go. Make Mindy come on." Rachel pleaded. Nathan looked at her and then looked down at the ground. He looked up again. "You're right. This is not our business. We shouldn't be here," he said. Rachel let out a sigh of relief, but just as she thought she had won, Mindy found something. "Hey guys, look, the cellar. Let's go down there and see what the father did. Maybe we will find something that was left behind," Mindy said in a trance-like voice. Earth to Mindy, hello. No, we're not going into the cellar, okay?" Rachel argued. "If you're so scared, you can go back to the van," Mindy snapped. Rachel took her up on that offer and hurried back to the van. "I'll wait in the van, but don't take forever," she spoke. Mindy assured her that they would be out soon. Mindy and Nathan looked at the cellar door and then at each other. Nathan slowly reached for the door and pushed it open. A dark stairway led to an area that was pitch black. Nathan shined his light down, and they slowly took it step by step until they were at the bottom. Mindy grabbed Nathan by the arm as he shone his light around. "There's a shovel," he spoke. "I bet that's the same one the father used to bury his family down here. But where is he?" They slowly walked around, shining the flashlight around as it revealed more clues. Nathan shined his light on the mound of dirt. "Look, Mindy, I bet these mounds are where he buried them," he spoke. Mindy covered her mouth with her hand as she walked around the mound. "Look, Nathan, a mound, but it looks unfinished. Where's all the dirt?" Mindy said confusingly. Nathan walked over to shine the light directly on it. He got a creepy feeling. "There's no dirt around it, because that wasn't dug from the outside. It was dug from underground." Nathan stepped back and turned around to desperately shine his light around. His light began flickering. "Oh no, the flashlight's going dead," he said as he repeatedly hit it to try to get the light back on. Each time it died. Mindy started sobbing. "Nathan, let's get out of here. Something is down here," she said. She held his arm. The flashlight died for good, and it was pitch black. Suddenly, the cellar door slammed shut. Nathan and Mindy stopped moving. Rachel? Nathan said. It was dead quiet. "Rachel, is that you?" he said again. After a moment of quiet, Mindy screamed, "Rachel, it's not funny. Open the door." It was pitch dark and quiet as Mindy and Nathan stood there in a cellar, not knowing who was there or where to go. Suddenly, something grabbed Nathan and Mindy and pulled them by their legs, dragging them underground as Mindy screamed. Rachel was sitting in the van when she heard a faint scream in the distance. She got out of the van and ran into the house screaming, Mindy, where are you?" She followed the screams to the cellar door as she tried to open it but couldn't. The scream from the cellar stopped and Rachel covered her mouth to try to stop her panting from being heard. Rachel heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the other side of the door. Rachel ran out of the house to the van and jumped in the driver's seat. She reached down to the ignition and let out a sigh of relief as she realized the keys were in there. She turned the van crank over as she turned her head to the house. The door to the house slowly closed as the van started. Rachel was just sobbing as she jammed the gas pedal and drove away. Rachel reported what happened to the police and filed a missing persons report on Mindy and Nathan. The local authorities searched the house and the cellar but found no traces of them. The only thing they found were a flashlight. Although one of the policemen thought he heard a faint screaming coming from deep underground, when he asked his partner if they could hear it too, they claimed they could not. Rachel told the police about the footsteps and the door closing as she left. Nobody knows what happened to the bodies of Mindy and Nathan, and Rachel is convinced that they are still down there. And if you go to that house and stand in the cellar, you will hear their cries for help. My husband and I love to go driving. We prefer road trips, but on the weekends or nights when we have nothing better to do, we go cruising and just drive around. We prefer smooth and not busy roads. On this night, we were bored and decided to go cruising. We went up north to a small town about a half hour from the city where the roads are curvy and smooth. This town is close to the mountains, and if you follow this main street all the way up north, it starts driving up to a mountain. It's about 9 p.m. and there are very few cars on the road. And since it's a small, cute town, it's already pretty empty. But we keep going north away from the houses and stores and eventually to where the roads start curving uphill. We drive up for about 15 minutes, and it's pitch black when we see some blinking lights. As we get closer, we see that a truck is on the side of the road, facing us. I'm getting the chills just thinking about it. All the way out there, in the middle of nowhere, and a stranded truck on the side of the road just is not a good mix. As he slowly approaches closer, I tell my husband it's probably for the best to turn back. I had a bad feeling. But at this point, we are pretty much to the truck. As he pulls up next to the truck, a young blonde guy, maybe in his late 20s, comes around and gets next to our window. I get such a bad vibe by this, and I tell my husband not to put the window down. I think he also gets a weird feeling, so he listens. He kind of just loudly asks what's wrong, and the guy just says something is wrong with his truck, and he might need a hand. His phone is dead. My husband asks what happened, but the guy insists on showing him and to come on and take a look. He says it in a very friendly tone and even calls him bro and says he's so glad we showed up. My husband says, "You know what? I won't be much help. I know nothing about cars, but let me call for help." He knows a lot about cars though, but that's not the point. The guy is insisting and gets visibly upset. I'm looking back at the truck and I thought I caught movement inside of the truck. I tell my husband, Dean, I think we should go. Now. He probably saw the look of fear in my face because he put the car in reverse. But as he did, the guy is now behind our car, acting stressed out, rubbing his face and kind of pacing. So my husband decides to go forward instead then. We drive up for maybe 2 more minutes trying to find a place to turn around, since the road is just very narrow. The road turns to dirt, and there's little space on the side. So even if we wanted to be quiet, you could hear the car turning around from a mile away. I'm absolutely dreading going back that way now, and our phones have no signal at all. In my mind, I know that this could really be someone with car problems. Maybe a friend is in the truck too. He never said he was alone. I just couldn't ignore that bad feeling in my gut though. We soon reach the area where the truck had been, but there's no truck at all. We drive down maybe another 5 minutes, but there's no trace of the truck. We should have passed it by now. Like I said, we didn't drive up too far to begin with. I am both relieved and terrified that this truck is no longer there. If it really had broken down, how did they get it to work in such short time? Calming myself down, I'm telling my husband, hey, maybe they really did get it to work. Maybe it turned on suddenly and they were able to drive off. Suspicious, but not impossible. As we kept driving through and the roads are straightening out, we noticed far off the trail, the truck with all the lights off parked on the side again. We noticed movement in the bed of the truck. I say out loud, why did they turn off all the lights? I think they think we are still too far away to see them, but we see 2 figures get on the other side of the truck and crouch down as if hiding. We get closer and my husband floors it. As we drive past, 2 men get up. One of them, the guy we had spoken to, and someone else with a very surprised look in their face. One of them runs behind us for a bit, and we see him get tinier in the back. I keep looking back terrified, but it's dark back there now, when suddenly, I see the headlights turn on in the truck, and they start driving in our direction, very fast. My husband keeps going fast, and eventually we lose the headlights. I keep looking back for the rest of the way, so scared that they're somehow still following us. Maybe they turned off their headlights again, and I just can't see them. Anyway, after driving for a very long time back to the city, we convince ourselves no one is following us. We do call the non-emergency line and give them a description of what we saw. We didn't get the plates of the truck, unfortunately. It was all so fast, and all the fear that I felt, I didn't really think about it. We just gave a description of the guy we saw, the type of truck it was, etc. But there's really nothing that could be done. I realized this could all be rationalized, but in the moment, we were filled with terror and fear. Being out there in the middle of nowhere and all the possibilities. They could have been armed. They could have put their truck sideways and left us with nowhere to go. They could have put something on the road to rip up our tires. And even though it could have all have some normal explanation, there are still so many questions. Why couldn't they tell us what was wrong? How did the truck work so fast again? Why did they turn off all of their lights? Why did they hide? It's been about a year, and it's just a creepy experience now. We still go cruising, but we usually just stick to more civilized areas, at least for nighttime cruises.